Azaiah was the kind of child who rarely filled a room with sound, yet his silence carried a weight that everyone could feel. When other children ran wild with laughter, when they spilled their joy recklessly into the air, Azaiah often stood at the edges, as if the world was a painting and he had been brushed slightly outside of its frame. He wasn't born this way. No child is born afraid of connection. Something had shaped him, molded him quietly into someone who hesitated before speaking, someone who measured every word before it left his mouth, someone who wondered if there was any space in the world where he truly belonged. If you had looked at him in the playground, you would have noticed the way his eyes darted from group to group, not with jealousy exactly, but with a longing he could not confess. He wanted to belong, but belonging had always been a mystery, an unspoken language that he never learned. And like many children who later grow into socially anxious adults, Azaiah's story began at home. His father was a man of few words, not the tender kind of silence, but the kind that left the air heavy, the kind that made a child wonder what he had done wrong. His mother was present but distracted, often buried beneath the weight of her own worries. To Azaiah, love was not something he could feel directly. It was more like a distant echo, like hearing laughter from another room, but never being invited inside. Children who do not feel consistently loved do not stop needing love. They simply begin to question their worthiness of it. And that questioning slowly seeped into every corner of Azaiah's mind. Psychologists often say that a child's sense of self is built like scaffolding in the early years. Each moment of warmth, each glance of encouragement, each hug, each word of affirmation, it becomes a beam that supports the child's self-esteem. But for Azaiah, those beams were thin and unstable. Instead of sturdy pillars of confidence, he grew up with fragile doubts. Am I enough? Was not a question he asked consciously, but it was one that lived in him like a quiet background noise, never leaving, always humming beneath the surface. When he went to school, the outside world reflected back what he already feared within. Children notice difference. They can sense the quiet child, the hesitant one, the one who doesn't push back when teased. And so Azaiah became the target of jokes that were not meant to destroy him, but still cut deeply. A shove in the hallway, a whisper followed by laughter, a name twisted into something cruel. To others it was ordinary childhood teasing, but to him it confirmed what he already believed, that something about him was wrong, that his place in the world was smaller, shakier, less certain than everyone else's. This is where the psychology of social anxiety begins to take root. Social anxiety is not just shyness. It is not simply being introverted. It is a constant inner dialogue, a rehearsal of potential embarrassment, a fixation on how one is being perceived. For children like Azaiah, the combination of neglect at home and rejection at school creates a cycle. He feels invisible at home, humiliated at school, and powerless in both. His brain, like any child's, adapts to survive, and the way it adapts is by withdrawing, by calculating every move, by assuming that if he stays small enough, quiet enough, unnoticed enough, he will not be hurt again. But here's the tragedy. What protects a child in one environment becomes the very prison that holds him captive in another. Azaiah's silence, his carefulness, his distance, these were survival tools in the storm of his childhood. Yet as he grew older, these same traits hardened into walls that kept him from the very thing he longed for: connection. Think about it. When a child grows up never feeling safe enough to speak openly, their nervous system learns to brace itself every time another person looks at them. This is the biology of social anxiety. The brain's amygdala, the part responsible for detecting threats, becomes overactive. The body floods with adrenaline even when the threat is nothing more than someone saying, "Hi, how are you?" To Azaiah, simple interactions felt like tests he was destined to fail. Every laugh in the distance could be laughter at him. Every pause in conversation could be rejection. And so, social life, which is supposed to be the fabric of childhood, became for him a tightrope walk, each step uncertain, each glance a danger. One day during a group project in school, his classmates asked him to present. It was something ordinary, just a short explanation in front of the class. But for Azaiah, the request felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. His chest tightened, his palms grew damp, his voice trembled before it even formed. And when the words finally came out, they stumbled, broken by hesitation. A few children snickered, not out of cruelty, but because children don't understand the weight of their laughter. For Azaiah, though, it was confirmation. His fear had come true, the spotlight had burned him, and the memory would replay in his head for weeks. The irony is that socially anxious children are often some of the most observant, the most sensitive to detail. They notice the flicker of an eye, the shift of a tone, the subtle cues that others miss. Their empathy is often heightened because they spend so much time scanning the emotional landscape of others, trying to avoid danger. But that very sensitivity, without the balance of confidence and love, becomes overwhelming. The gift of deep perception turns into the curse of constant self-doubt. And so, Azaiah's story is not just his own. It is the story of countless children who grow up in homes where love is inconsistent, in schools where cruelty hides behind the mask of normal childhood teasing, in societies where quietness is mistaken for weakness. These children do not choose to be socially anxious. They adapt to the world they are given. They internalize the unspoken lesson that safety comes from silence, that invisibility is the only way to survive. But here's the deeper truth. Social anxiety is not simply about fear of others. At its root, it is about the fear of oneself being seen. It is the terror that if the world truly saw you, your voice, your flaws, your needs, it would reject you entirely. And that belief, once planted in childhood, grows like a shadow across the years. As Azaiah grew older, he carried that shadow with him. At family gatherings, he stayed on the edges. In classrooms, he avoided raising his hand even when he knew the answer. On the rare occasions when someone reached out in kindness, he questioned it, wondering if it was a joke, a setup, or a temporary illusion that would soon vanish. His inner dialogue was relentless. What if I say the wrong thing? What if they laugh? What if I'm not enough? This is what psychologists call anticipatory anxiety, the fear not of what is happening, but of what might happen. For socially anxious children, the future is filled with imagined humiliations, endless scenarios of rejection, each one replayed before it even has the chance to occur. And so, many moments of potential joy are lost, not because rejection actually happens, but because the fear of rejection is enough to silence them. Yet, if we pause here, there is a deeper question. What does it mean, really, for a child to grow up believing that their presence is too much or not enough? What does it do to a young soul when their earliest memories of love are laced with absence or doubt? It creates not just anxiety, but a fractured sense of self. It convinces them that their worth is conditional, fragile, always on the verge of being taken away. And that belief becomes the lens through which they see the entire world. As the years passed, Azaiah's silence followed him like a shadow he could never escape. What had once been the quiet hesitance of a child grew into the guarded composure of an adolescent. On the outside, he seemed calm, almost invisible, but inside, every interaction felt like walking across thin glass. He replayed conversations long after they ended, searching for mistakes no one else even noticed. He analyzed the way he stood, the way his hands moved, the way his voice cracked on certain words. In his mind, the world was always watching, always judging, always one step away from confirming what he feared most, that he did not belong. Psychologists often describe social anxiety as the fear of negative evaluation, but for Azaiah, it went deeper than that. It wasn't only about what others thought of him, it was about what he thought of himself. His self-image had been shaped by years of quiet neglect and subtle rejection. When a child does not hear "you are loved as you are," they begin to believe that love must be earned, performed, or disguised. And so Azaiah grew into someone who carried an invisible weight, the belief that he had to be perfect in order to be acceptable, flawless in order to be safe. At school, this perfectionism showed in small ways. He stayed up late rewriting essays, terrified that one mistake would expose him. He avoided raising his hand in class, not because he didn't know the answer, but because the possibility of being wrong felt unbearable. In group conversations, he rehearsed responses in his head but rarely spoke them aloud. And when he did finally speak, he left the moment haunted, replaying every syllable, convinced that others had noticed his nervous tone. This is one of the cruel paradoxes of social anxiety. The more a person longs for connection, the more their fear of rejection prevents it. Azaiah wanted friends. He wanted to laugh freely. He wanted to share the strange, beautiful thoughts that filled his mind. But every time the opportunity appeared, a wall rose within him. What if they laugh? What if I embarrass myself? What if I say the wrong thing? And so he remained silent, and the silence was misunderstood. To others he appeared distant, uninterested, maybe even unfriendly. But beneath that mask was a heart that desperately wanted to be seen. By the time adolescence arrived, the stakes felt even higher. Teenagers live in a world of performance. Every hallway a stage, every classroom a silent competition for approval. For Azaiah, this world magnified his fears. Walking into a crowded cafeteria felt like stepping into a spotlight. Every laugh in the distance felt personal. Every whisper felt dangerous. The truth, of course, was that most people weren't thinking about him at all. But the anxious mind doesn't need evidence. It only needs possibility. And possibility was enough to keep him trapped. Yet here is the important thing to understand. Social anxiety is not weakness. It is not laziness or lack of willpower. It is the nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do: protect. Azaiah's brain had learned from early neglect and schoolyard rejection that the world was unsafe, and so his body responded with adrenaline. His heart raced, his hands shook, his words stumbled. To others it looked like shyness. To him it felt like survival. But over time, survival came at a cost, because while silence protected him from rejection, it also kept him from belonging. Friendships faded because he was too afraid to reach out. Opportunities passed by because he was too afraid to speak up. Life became smaller, narrower, shaped less by desire and more by avoidance. And the tragedy of avoidance is that it convinces you you're safe, while secretly stealing the very life you long for. There were moments, however, when Azaiah glimpsed another possibility: a kind teacher who praised his writing, a classmate who smiled at him without mockery, a rare afternoon when he spoke freely and no one laughed. These moments were small, but they carried weight. They reminded him that perhaps his fears were not the whole truth, that perhaps there was more to him than the anxious voice in his mind. And this is where the psychology deepens. Research shows that social anxiety often emerges in childhood, but can persist into adulthood unless disrupted. The patterns become self-reinforcing. Fear leads to avoidance. Avoidance prevents positive experiences, and the lack of positive experiences confirms the fear. But within this cycle lies the possibility of change, because just as the brain learns fear, it can also learn safety. Just as the body memorizes rejection, it can also memorize belonging. For Azaiah, healing did not come all at once. It came in fragile steps, often so small they barely felt like progress. Speaking a single sentence in class, making brief eye contact, allowing himself to laugh without immediately analyzing it. These moments were uncomfortable, sometimes even painful, but each one chipped away at the walls he had built, and with time he discovered something extraordinary. The fear never fully vanished, but his ability to carry it grew. This is an important truth about social anxiety. Healing is not about erasing fear, it is about changing your relationship with it. It is about realizing that fear is a voice, not a verdict. That trembling hands and a racing heart are not signs of weakness, but signs of courage in motion. Azaiah began to see that every act of speaking, every step into connection, was not proof of failure, but evidence of bravery. Still, the past lingered. The absence of parental love, the sting of childhood bullying, the long years of silence. These experiences left marks that could not simply be undone. But instead of being only scars, they began to transform into sources of understanding. Azaiah's sensitivity, once a burden, became a strength. He noticed details others overlooked. He listened deeply. He understood the quiet struggles of those around him. And slowly he realized that what had once made him anxious also made him compassionate. Here lies the paradox of social anxiety, the very qualities that fuel it, sensitivity, self-awareness, the deep need for connection can, with healing, become the foundation of wisdom and empathy. What once made Azaiah feel fragile now gave him insight into the human heart. But let's return to the bigger question. Why does a child like Azaiah become socially anxious in the first place? The answer is layered. Attachment theory suggests that when children do not receive consistent warmth and responsiveness from caregivers, they develop insecure attachment styles, which often manifest as anxiety in relationships. Trauma research shows that repeated experiences of rejection or humiliation can rewire the nervous system to anticipate danger in social settings. Cognitive psychology points to distorted thinking patterns, like overestimating the likelihood of rejection, that perpetuate the anxiety. Yet behind all these theories lies something more human, more universal. At the core of social anxiety is a longing. The longing to belong, to be accepted, to be loved without condition. When that longing is unmet in childhood, it does not disappear. It grows silently, shaping the way a person sees themselves in the world. And until it is met, even in adulthood, the child within still waits at the edge of the playground, watching others laugh, wondering if there is a place for them too. Azaiah's journey reminds us of this, that behind every quiet child, every hesitant teenager, every anxious adult, there is a story of moments that shaped their nervous system, of absences that carved doubt into their hearts, of small cruelties that echoed louder than anyone realized. To dismiss them as shy or antisocial is to miss the depth of their struggle. To understand them, however, is to see not just their fear, but their resilience. And so the psychology of a child who became socially anxious is not only about anxiety. It is about the complexity of being human. It is about how love, or the lack of it, leaves lasting imprints. It is about how sensitivity can be both wound and gift. It is about how silence can hide longing, and how longing, when met with understanding, can finally lead to healing. In the end, Azaiah's story is not only about him, it is about us. Because in some way, we all carry echoes of social anxiety. The moments when we feared judgment, when we stayed quiet instead of speaking, when we doubted our place in the world. And perhaps that is why his story feels so familiar. It reminds us that the desire to be seen, to be loved, to belong, is the most human desire of all. And though fear may whisper otherwise, the truth is this: every child, every person deserves a place where their presence is enough.